So without further ado, panel members, why is youth participation important? Why is it important to young people, and why is it important to youth work? Why bother writing a book about it? And why bother having to have a panel? And I'm going to start with Harry, if he can address that, and then perhaps we whip around the other panel members. So, Harry, why is youth participation important?
Well, I'm going to cheat a bit because you could cite a long list of the positive benefits of youth work. There's a list of benefits to the individual young person of participating. Then there's another list of all the benefits that accrue to their family, their community. And then there's another list of all the benefits that accrue through the improvement of public services, the improvements of policies that are products of youth participation. Then there's another set of benefits which are all to do with the way that it contributes to the building of citizenship, and through the building of citizenship to the protection of democracy. So it's a long list, and I haven't got time to go through it all, and it's all in the book. So I'm going to say, being me, I'm going to tell you that it really doesn't matter, because from where I'm coming, to speak out and be heard is every young person's human right. And the fact that something is your human right means that it's worth defending, that the right that you have to do it needs to be defended and promoted, regardless of what benefits we think it might bring or not bring. So yes, all the benefits are there, and you can read the book and find out what they are. But for me, the important thing is it's their human right, and it's our obligation, therefore, as duty bearers, to make sure that that right is fulfilled and respected.
Thanks, Harry. Now, Harry, you're the architect of models of youth participation, and you actually quite like Hart's model, even though you've come up with your own. Tell us a little bit about Hart's model, and then about how yours is different.
Okay, and I'm going to start with a quote from an American statistician that I put in the book. He said, essentially all models are wrong, but some of them are useful. So that quote is like a motto for me when it comes to dealing with models. None of them tell us what reality is. Has already been mentioned that the reality is far more messy than can be captured in any model. So the issue is not whether any model is a correct version of the world we live in. It's how useful are they to me in my goals as a youth worker or a researcher or an analyst or a policymaker or whatever. So I find several of the current models useful in different ways. And I still come back to Roger Hart over and over again. And the reason is because it was Roger Hart who first talked about, Roger Hart was writing about child participation in the context of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and I know that we're including some young adults above that childhood range. But even so, Roger presented, I know he adapted from Einstein as well, but he presented what he called non-participation, I call false participation. The three modes that he put forward were manipulation, which is about when the adults fix things so that it's all done to achieve the adults' goals rather than the young people's goals. And there's many ways that gets done, and sometimes gets done almost by unconscious actions of adults who feel they know what is to be achieved here, regardless of what the young people want. And then we have decoration, where the young people are used in adult-run events simply to make the adults look and feel good. And then we have tokenism, when the young people are brought in to give an appearance of participation, but their input is not valued or not reacted to or has no influence. And honestly, that was 92 Hart was published. So in the 28 years since then, I really don't think anybody has done any serious new exploration of these issues. And I think these are still massive problems. I think there's still a huge amount goes on where young people are manipulated by adults. I think they're used for decorating activities very often. I think there's still an awful lot of tokenism. And so I keep going back to Hart because nobody else since then has really tackled that issue as well as he did. So that's why I go back to Hart, and I think my own work built on it because it looked more closely at our the adults, the facilitators, the adult workers, youth workers, play workers, educators, people in facilitation roles, looks at our attitudes and what we bring or don't bring to the process in a way that Hart's model didn't. So does that answer your question?
It does. Thanks, Harry. And I encourage people to go to Harry's website and have a look at Harry's various models there. Pathways is well known, but there's also the participation tree, which is an organic model and very
absolutely.
So the question is, how do we ensure that all young people are able to participate when we live in environments and systems that are inaccessible and exclude some young people? I'm thinking particularly because we have a history in Australia of institutionalisation and segregated spaces for some young people.
Harry, do you want to have a go at that, Harry?
It's a massive question, but to try and simplify it, I would say that it is exactly our job, our role as youth workers to tackle this. When faced with this question, we look for what are the barriers. We try to get clarity on what are the barriers, where they come from, how have they been created, and then we look for ways to dismantle them. And we do it with whatever allies we need. We seek the resources we need to do it. And in every case of discrimination, exclusion, marginalization, there'll be different kinds of barriers that have come about in different ways. So as youth workers, we need to be always looking for what's the barrier here? And it might be different in every case, but once we find what the barriers are, what do we need to be able to start taking down that barrier? So there's no one simple answer to tackle every kind of exclusion, but every kind of exclusion, marginalization, discrimination, there's always barriers there, and they can always be tackled once we make it our job to do so.
Thanks, Harry.
Over the years, we've seen federal and state and even local governments build and dismantle youth participation systems and processes over the last few decades. So it can be hard for a lot of us to have that bigger picture if we don't have the history of how we've progressed over the years. And I put in my question, and or digressed over the years, and in our society's genuine desire and approach to involving young people is now as good as it's been, which means we need to innovate to progress, or should we be looking backwards at history to see where we should go in the future?
I reckon, Harry, you've done a bit of thinking about innovating, and particularly in developing countries, as well as through the UN. What's your view? If youth peak bodies want to innovate, what should they be doing, Harry?
Goodness, right. I'm not sure I know that because, well, I think some of you know, I spent 11 years living and working with children, young workers on the coffee plantations in northern Nicaragua, and an awful lot of what I know about child and youth participation came from that experience, although often I struggle to adapt what those young people achieved to the circumstances of working with young people in countries like Ireland, Australia. But basically, I think one of the biggest learnings for me when I went to Nicaragua was to take on board the Latin American concept of protagonismo infantil. And it's not something that you can easily translate, but it's the Latin version of child-led or proactive youth participation. Because I heard when we were talking about co-design earlier, and the way I see it is, the whole co-design thing is where adults are inviting young people to get involved in doing our stuff with us. And that's why the question of whether we should be paying them comes up. Protagonismo is the opposite. It's when the adults look for ways to support the young people in doing their stuff. It's their stuff that's being done, and we're trying to find ways to support them rather than trying to get them to do our stuff. So I think there's a question for these formal youth bodies. To what extent are these really adults inviting the young people into a structure that we still control? And to what extent are these structures really young people structures run by them with us supporting? So I think maybe that's a question to ask in looking at the way forward. And I'm interested in trying to encourage and support protagonismo, where we're supporting the young people stuff rather than trying to get them more involved in our stuff.